Can a song outlive a lifetime? Some of the biggest songs from 1965 are now more than 60 years old, yet many can still stop people in their tracks after only a few notes. What makes that even more remarkable is that these were not just popular records. Many of them changed music forever while hiding stories most listeners never heard. Behind the melodies were accidents, pressure, heartbreak, and moments that shaped an entire generation. And some of these songs may be far more familiar than you expect. I Can't Get No Satisfaction, The Rolling Stones. One guitar riff was enough to change rock music forever. When Satisfaction begins, most people recognize it instantly. But what most listeners never realize is that Keith Richards said he first heard that famous riff in a dream. Half asleep, he recorded it on a small tape machine beside his bed before forgetting it by morning. At first, the band did not think the song would become special. The lyrics were about frustration, commercialism, and feeling trapped by modern life. In 1965, that message felt raw and dangerous. Young listeners immediately connected to it because it sounded honest. The song soon became the Rolling Stones' first major American #1 hit, and from that moment forward, the band was no longer just another British group. They became one of rock's most important names. Yesterday, the Beatles. What if one of the greatest songs ever written arrived in a dream? That is exactly what Paul McCartney said happened with Yesterday. He woke up one morning with the entire melody already in his head. Because it sounded so perfect, he spent weeks asking people if he had accidentally copied it from somewhere else. At first, the song had a temporary title that sounded almost ridiculous. McCartney called it Scrambled Eggs while he searched for the right words. But the real power of the song came from its simplicity. Unlike many Beatles songs at the time, Yesterday used a string quartet instead of a full band arrangement. That softer sound made the emotion feel more personal. What most people never realize is that the song helped prove that pop music could be deeply emotional without sounding dramatic. It later became one of the most recorded songs in music history, showing that sometimes the quietest songs can become the loudest memories. My Girl, The Temptations. Sometimes a single bass line can become unforgettable. The opening of My Girl is one of those rare moments. Before a single word is sung, many listeners already know exactly what song they are hearing. But the real story goes deeper. Smokey Robinson wrote the song specifically to showcase David Ruffin's voice because he believed Ruffin had the emotional sound needed to carry it. Before this record, Ruffin had not fully stepped forward as the group's standout lead. Motown was not simply making songs, it was building hits with precision. Writers, musicians, and producers worked under intense pressure to create records that could cross every audience. That mattered in 1965 because America was deeply divided, yet My Girl became a song that reached listeners everywhere. What most people never realize is that behind its warmth was a larger shift in music history. The song helped soul music move further into the mainstream, and decades later, its simple message still feels timeless because genuine emotion rarely loses its power. Help, the Beatles. What if a hit song was actually a cry for help? To many people, help sounds bright and energetic. The harmonies feel polished, and the chorus feels uplifting. But years later, John Lennon admitted the song carried a very different meaning. By 1965, the Beatles had become so famous that normal life had almost disappeared. Crowds followed them everywhere. Privacy vanished. Pressure never stopped. Lennon later explained that the song was not just written for a movie. He said he was honestly overwhelmed and struggling emotionally. The words were more personal than most listeners understood at the time. That hidden truth changed how many fans heard the song later. Beneath the catchy melody was a man quietly admitting he was losing control. And this is where the song becomes more powerful. Millions of people sang along without realizing they were hearing vulnerability hidden inside a pop hit. That is part of what made the Beatles different. They were not only writing songs people enjoyed, they were beginning to reveal real emotion in ways popular music had rarely done before. Unchained Melody, The Righteous Brothers. Some songs become bigger than the era that created them. That is exactly what happened with Unchained Melody. By the time the Righteous Brothers recorded it in 1965, the song already existed for years. It had originally been written for a prison film in the 1950s. But few people could have predicted what would happen when Bobby Hatfield sang it. His soaring vocal transformed the song into something deeply emotional. The way his voice rose during the final chorus made the record feel almost impossible to forget. What most listeners never knew is that the record label did not initially treat it as the main song. Another track was supposed to receive more attention, but radio stations started playing Unchained melody because audiences kept requesting it. That changed everything. Instead of executives deciding the hit, listeners chose it themselves. That rarely happens so clearly in the music industry. The song later found new life in movies and television, introducing it to entirely new generations. The real reason it lasted is simple. Some songs are heard, others are felt, and Unchained Melody became one of those rare records that still feels emotional no matter how many decades pass. I Got You Babe, Sonny and Cher.
And if I get scared...
Could a simple love song define an entire decade? In 1965, I Got You Babe sounded almost innocent. But behind that simple melody was a song that became much larger than anyone expected. Sonny Bono wrote it for himself and Cher while they were still trying to break into the music business. Record labels were unsure whether the pair could succeed because their sound did not fit neatly into one style. That uncertainty almost kept the song from becoming a hit. What made it connect was honesty. Instead of promising wealth or perfection, the song simply said, having someone beside you could be enough. Young listeners connected to that message immediately. The chemistry between Sonny and Cher also mattered. Their voices sounded completely different, but together they created something people remembered. The song quickly reached #1 and turned the pair into international stars. What most people never realize is that songs often become timeless because they capture a feeling people do not know how to describe. I Got You Babe did exactly that. It became more than a love song. It became part of the emotional soundtrack of the 1960s, and that is why many people still know every word even after all these years. Mr. Tambourine Man, the Byrds. One song helped change what popular music could sound like. Before Mr. Tambourine Man, folk music and rock music usually stayed apart. Then the Byrds changed that. The song was written by Bob Dylan, but the Byrds gave it a bright electric sound that felt completely fresh. Roger McGuinn's 12-string guitar became the signature sound listeners could not ignore. But the real issue goes deeper. Many fans never realized session musicians played much of the instrumental track because the record company wanted a cleaner sound. That was a hidden part of the music business many listeners never saw. Even so, the song changed everything. Its success created folk rock almost overnight. Suddenly, artists realized deeper lyrics could work in mainstream music. That mattered because it pushed pop music beyond simple love songs. Writers could now explore confusion, change, and personal reflection. Mr. Tambourine Man was not just another hit. It opened a door that many artists would later walk through. And once that happened, music in the 1960s started becoming something much more thoughtful than many people expected. I Can't Help Myself. 4 tops. A catchy chorus can hide an important story. That is exactly what happened with I Can't Help Myself. Most listeners remember the joyful hook, but behind that bright sound was the powerful Motown machine working at full force. Producers Holland Dozier Holland were famous for demanding perfection. Songs were repeated again and again until every note sounded right. Nothing was left to chance. Lead singer Levi Stubbs gave the song something even more important. His voice carried both strength and vulnerability at the same time. That emotional balance helped the song feel real. The record quickly became one of Motown's biggest hits of 1965. But what made it bigger was what it represented. At a time when racial divisions were still shaping America, Motown was quietly changing who could dominate mainstream radio. That shift mattered far beyond music. Songs like this helped introduce black artists to wider audiences across the country. Many listeners simply heard a catchy tune, but the cultural meaning underneath was much larger. That is one reason I Can't Help Myself still feels important today. Sometimes a song can sound joyful while still carrying a much deeper place in history. Turn, 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 the Byrds. Byrds. Could ancient words become a modern hit? In 1965, Turn, Turn, Turn proved they could. Most of the lyrics came directly from the Book of Ecclesiastes, meaning some of the song's words were thousands of years old before they ever reached the radio. That alone made the song unusual. Pete Seeger first adapted the words into a folk song, but the Byrds gave it a sound that felt modern and urgent. The timing mattered too. America was entering a period of growing tension, and the line about "a time for peace" carried a deeper meaning for many listeners. What most people never realized is that the song's message about life moving in cycles made it feel personal to nearly everyone. Joy and loss, beginning and ending, change and renewal. Those ideas made the song feel larger than ordinary pop music. The record reached #1 and showed that audiences were willing to embrace deeper themes when the music felt accessible. That is why it still resonates today. The instruments may sound like the 1960s, but the message still feels timeless because human life has not changed nearly as much as people think. Stop in the Name of Love, the Supremes.
Stop in the name of love.
What made one simple hand gesture unforgettable? When Stop in the Name of Love appeared, the Supremes turned a dramatic pause into one of music's most memorable moments. But behind that polished performance was real emotion. Songwriter Lamont Dozier later explained that the lyrics were inspired by personal relationship problems happening while the song was being written. That emotional tension gave the song its urgency. Diana Ross delivered the words with calm control instead of anger. That made the warning feel stronger. And this is where things become important. Motown carefully presented the Supremes as elegant and refined because the group was helping break barriers on television and radio. At a time when black female artists faced enormous obstacles, that visibility mattered. Many listeners only heard a catchy hit, but the song also represented a quiet cultural shift in American entertainment. It showed that style, emotion, and social change could all exist inside one 3-minute record. That is part of why the song still stands out today. It was not simply popular. It became part of a larger moment in music history. Wooly Bully, Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs. Sometimes the strangest songs become the biggest surprises. That was true for Wooly Bully. At first, many listeners had no idea what the lyrics even meant. The words sounded playful, chaotic, and slightly mysterious. That confusion actually helped the song. Its raw energy made it feel different from polished pop records dominating radio in 1965. What most people never realize is that the song was almost considered too unusual for mainstream success. Its rough sound and odd vocal style did not fit the normal formula, but audiences loved it anyway. The song became one of the year's biggest sellers, even though it never reached #1. That alone made it remarkable. Its loose, wild style also showed that music did not always need to sound perfect to connect emotionally. Sometimes personality mattered more than precision. Wooly Bully captured the fun side of the 1960s before rock became more serious later in the decade. That may be why it still feels unique. It reminds people of a time when a weird song with a strange title could unexpectedly become part of music history. King of the Road, Roger Miller.
Short but not too big around.
Could a song about having nothing feel rich? That is what made King of the Road so unusual. At first, it sounded like a light country tune about a wandering man with no money. But beneath that simple melody was a song about freedom. Roger Miller wrote the song after noticing a sign on the side of a barn that read, "Trailers for sale or rent." That tiny moment inspired a song millions would remember. What made it stand out was perspective. Instead of feeling sorry for the character, the song celebrated living without pressure. That message connected with listeners. In a decade when many people felt trapped by routine, the idea of freedom sounded powerful. The song crossed from country into pop, something that was harder to do in that era. That crossover helped expand country music's place in mainstream radio. Many listeners simply smiled at the catchy lyrics. But the deeper meaning was about seeing value where others only see lack. That is why the song still feels memorable today. It turned an ordinary story into something surprisingly meaningful, and that kind of songwriting rarely disappears. Do You Believe in Magic, the Lovin' Spoonful?
Come along with me, we'll dance until
Some songs feel happy from the first note. Do You Believe in Magic was one of them. Released in 1965, the song captured the excitement many young people felt as music itself was beginning to change. But the real story goes deeper. The magic in the song was not fantasy. It was the emotional effect music can have on people. John Sebastian wrote it to describe the feeling of hearing a song that instantly changes your mood. That simple idea connected strongly with listeners. At a time when music was becoming more personal, the song reminded people that records could feel almost transformative. Its upbeat sound also made it different from darker songs that would soon appear later in the decade. The Lovin' Spoonful created something warm, hopeful, and immediate. That helped the song become one of the defining sounds of its time. What most people never realize is that songs about music itself often last longer because they describe something universal. Even decades later, listeners still understand exactly what that magic feels like. And that may be why the song continues to feel alive long after 1965 disappeared. Hang On Sloopy, the McCoys.
Hang on, Sloopy, Sloopy.
One unexpected hit can change everything. That happened with Hang On Sloopy. The McCoys were a young band when they recorded the song, and few expected it to become a major success. But the energy of the performance made it impossible to ignore. The rough guitar sound and urgent vocals gave the song a raw feeling many polished records lacked. What most listeners never knew is that the song had already been recorded before by other artists, but none of those versions made the same impact. The McCoys found something others missed. They gave it an attitude. That difference helped it climb to #1. The song later became deeply associated with Ohio and college sports culture, giving it a life beyond the charts. That kind of second life is rare. Many songs fade after their moment ends. Hang On Sloopy kept finding new audiences in different places. That is often what separates a hit from a lasting song. It does not just survive its own era, it keeps being rediscovered, and sometimes that matters more than how high it originally climbed. You Were On My Mind, We Five. Some songs become timeless because they sound honest. That is exactly what happened with You Were On My Mind. When We Five released the song in 1965, its smooth harmonies immediately stood out. It sounded softer than many louder records of the time, but that softness became part of its strength. The song had originally been written by folk singer Sylvia Tyson, but the group gave it a more polished folk pop arrangement that widened its appeal. What most listeners never realized was that the song's emotional meaning felt intentionally unclear. That uncertainty made the song feel personal to different people in different ways. Listeners could place their own memories inside the lyrics. That is often what gives a song lasting power. Instead of telling people exactly what to feel, it lets them decide. The harmonies also helped separate the song from many other hits in 1965. There was a warmth in the vocal blend that made it feel intimate even on the radio. The song became one of the group's biggest successes, even though they never matched it again. But sometimes one unforgettable song is enough. Because long after the charts move on, people rarely remember every hit from a year. They remember the songs that made them feel something they could not explain. And for many listeners, this was one of them. These songs were more than just hits from 1965. They became pieces of memory that survived long after the year itself disappeared. Some changed music, some changed culture, and some simply stayed alive because they made people feel something real. What makes them timeless is not just how they sounded, but how deeply they connected with the people who heard them. And once you understand the stories behind them, it becomes impossible to hear these songs the same way again. So which one still lives in your memory? Let me know in the comments below.